Good morning again. You could just walk to your seats. Also, good morning to those who are connected via video link on Zoom. And then we can start. I've been told I have to stand here on this spot. So, because that's for the camera for those people who are on Zoom. So I can't move about. And I have to speak with a very loud Dutch voice because the microphone is letting us a little bit down this morning. Well, good morning. Welcome to Brussels to the Bay. It's been a while, but we're ready to go again. It's as you may remember, the aim of Brussels to the Bay is to build bridges between the West Coast, between the US, California, Silicon Valley, and the European Union, Brussels, and beyond. Maybe some people are now intent on blowing up bridges, but we are still building them. We prefer to build bridges rather than to repair bridges. So this is in that spirit of cooperation, learning from each other, listening to each other, what we are doing, how we can collectively make the world a better place. And in this case, like this morning, make it a safer place. I really admire your stamina because, I mean, this is RSA week. So you have been breathing and speaking and listening, talking about cybersecurity since Monday morning, and so you're still here. Really good, courageous. I mean, we'll have some more cybersecurity. A very interesting panel. My name is Gerard de Graaf. I'm the head of the EU office here. I'm senior envoy for digital to the United States. I used to be in Brussels, based in DG Connect in the European Commission. I saw on the program that I was supposed to speak for 15 minutes. And I'm sure very few of you came here today to listen to me speak for 15 minutes. And for those who actually came to listen to me for 15 minutes, you made a mistake. Because I'm not going to speak for 15 minutes, but the mistake is more than compensated for by a stellar panel and a stellar moderator. It's going to be really exciting, and I hope we will all learn a lot and you will go happy to your offices or maybe even home to really fulfilled. I have a personal connection with cybersecurity in the sense that my first job as a director in the European Commission, this goes back to 2010, so 15 years ago, was director for cybersecurity. And at the time, it was a very small unit. I think there were probably 8 or 9 people. It's a whole directorate today, so that already shows the difference. And there was frankly nothing. I mean, we didn't have any governance frameworks. I mean, we had no funding. It was, I mean, we produced what good bureaucrats do is communications, like one every year, papers, and we held meetings, and that was the kind of, that was like, well, we did a bit more, but that was mainly the contribution that we made. We started the work, I mean, it gets a little bit more technical now on the Network Information Security Directive, NIS1, and we are already at NIS2, which is being implemented, and lots more has happened, and you will hear about that this morning. And just if you just think about it, this is like not even 15 years ago where we were then, and not only in terms of like the European Commission and policy making, but more generally. I mean, this was not a political priority at the time. I mean, industry was not so developed. I mean, the cooperation between the member states in the European Union was, well, I mean, I wouldn't say non-existent. There were some member states that were working closely with each other based on kind of their own connections. But at EU level, I mean, there was very little kind of cooperation. And so we have come a long way. But at the same time, of course, and you hear it, this is like, one thing you can know for sure is that cybersecurity and cyber threats and cyber attacks and all of this, whether it's like state-sponsored or whether it's like ransomware and like more criminal activity, it continues to grow. That you know for sure. So if you're in that business, and I mean, both of the panelists are in that business, you know that you're not going to go get out of business or go out of business very soon. This is something that like will continue to grow and be important. And then you have the technology, of course. I mean, we will talk about that, no doubt, about AI and everything else. So 15 years ago, we come from like very little, and now it's a full-blown industry with like lots of also European companies. We need more startups in this space. We have frameworks in place. So we have all the tools in place. It's still cat and mouse, but at least the I like to think we're the cat rather than the mouse, because that I think the cat typically wins. Not always. I mean, there are some like cartoons that where the mouse wins, but in normal life the cat wins, and I think we have all the tools in place to be successful and use also the technologies like AI for purposes of better cyber defense and cybersecurity protection. So with that, I mean, let me introduce the moderator. I'm really grateful. It's always good to have a moderator, because otherwise it's going to be quite complicated to have a panel. But we have an excellent moderator, Angelica Dorch, who is the liaison EU-US for Digital Europe. So I'm going to hand over to Angelica, and then she will introduce the panelists, and then we'll just kick it off, and there'll be some Q&A and everything else. But you will hear from Angelica. So have a very productive session this morning.
Perfect.
Angelica.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us both in person and online today. So I'm excited. I get to talk about my favorite topic, which is cybersecurity, public-private partnerships, and we have a really great panel. I want to ask them to come up because I want them to introduce themselves, and I also have an introductory question, but I'll kick it off just talking about myself really quickly. Come on up. Again, Angelica Dorch, I'm with Digital Europe. I'm the EU-US liaison, and you probably didn't know that Digital Europe had a US person because this is brand new. So we're making sure that we have US presence for our members. Digital Europe is one of the largest tech trade organizations in Europe, with representing over 45,000 businesses, both domestically and internationally. So we're excited as we transition, different governments around the world to provide our businesses with the intelligence, but opportunity to engage different governments around the world on issues like cybersecurity. But with that, I want to turn to our panelists just to ask you to introduce yourself, your name, your current role, and tell me, this week, have you been able to avoid any discussion around artificial intelligence?
I think if you have been successful in avoiding that, you haven't been here. So indeed, so my name is Christiane Kierkegaard de Viron. I lead the directorate in DG Connect that deals with cybersecurity, also digital health and digital identity. So the role that Gerard had 15 years ago, but as you also said, with a lot of focus around cyber. And indeed, there's been a lot of discussions around AI. It's been great to see, to be able to also talk to the companies that are present at RSA, also the European ones, of course, to also understand, deeper how it actually changes our security mission, but certainly also on the risks that come with them that we need to take into account. So it's been great discussions around it.
Hi, everyone. I am Andrea Carcano, founder of Nozomi Networks. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. Busy week, as you said, and absolutely unsuccessful to avoid discussion on AI. Actually, we also claim that we have AI in our software. What we do and what I do, I'm a technical person. I did a PhD focus in protecting critical infrastructures, power plants, transportation, airports, oil and gas, everything that is vital for our day-by-day life. And I founded a company that is building a product designed to protect this type of critical infrastructure. And so the company is based here in the United States, but funded in Europe, and the R&D, the biggest R&D team is based in Europe. So we like to call ourselves a dual company. Pleasure to be here and looking forward to discussing with the rest of the panel.
Yeah, well, good morning as well. My name is Casper, and I do government affairs for a cybersecurity company called Zscaler, which is relatively unknown to most people, but San Jose based. And I guess I'm hired to help increase the awareness of this company a little bit. And apologies for having two Danish weird accents in the panel today. But it's not like the Danes are heavily involved in cybersecurity, but I guess today it's one of those. I have a past in doing something similar to what a few people are doing here today. So I worked for government for a few years, and also actually for the EU institutions in some weird places around the world. the Balkans, Afghanistan, Sudan, Darfur, and as a punishment, I was sent to Silicon Valley to open sort of an embassy to the tech industry. I don't know whether that was deliberate, but I'm very happy to see that the EU is now fully staffed there. I think that's a great opportunity, especially at a moment where I think we need alternative ways of communicating across the Atlantic. So I don't want to disagree with what others have said in this panel. Of course, AI has been on the agenda this week, but I would actually say that genuine intelligence, or the lack of, has also been one of the topics that we've been discussing these days. And I think there's an interesting dimension on how we collaborate across the Atlantic at a moment where there is a lot of political turmoil, and where I think, just to make one point, that in many ways the private sector will have to be the custodians of the transatlantic relationship and really have to step up to the plate and make sure that we stay closer together at a moment where there are a lot of threats from the outside that we should be very worried about. So on this happy note, back to you. Good to be here, and thanks very much for being here.
John, I wanted to see, so you've been at the Cybersecurity International Forum, RSA, you've been doing other events, bilateral meetings. So what's one message that you think you'll be taking back to Brussels, just around areas of where we can synergize around protecting infrastructure, around healthcare systems, all the way to kind of the undersea cables, because we are seeing, as Casper mentioned, just an increasingly sophisticated threat landscape and environment. So what's something that you think you'll take back to Brussels, and your biggest lesson learned from all these meetings you've been in this week?
So, I mean, I'm happy we already covered the AI point, because that's definitely something that otherwise I would have mentioned. I think when we're looking at, we had a very nice meeting with lots of different governments present to sort of kick off also the week here in San Francisco. And, I think what we see is, in a way, there's a good convergence around between, all our like-minded countries in terms of how we see the threats, how we see the risks. There is also, we also see that when we're discussing, we are like looking at the why and the what, and it is to a large extent the same across many jurisdictions. The how can be different, but there is a lot of interest, I think, from our global partners to actually continue the cooperation amongst all of us, having these discussions also because we are increasingly doing the same things. There's a strong drive, I find, amongst basically all governments I've been talking to here, which is also, it's important to do cybersecurity, but we should not forget the impact it has on our businesses. So there's a strong drive to have like what I would call business-friendly cybersecurity. Okay. And one part of this is also that we actually talk much more together, because we have a lot of companies that are present in the same market. So we need to be looking much more and, how can we work together, that when we go and do our different things, that we do it in a way that works for our companies. I think there's a really big discussion going on at the government level around this, let's say, amongst all our partners.
In for organizations, but I think there's that phrase, a rising all ships, right? So we want to make sure everybody is implementing the standards, the frameworks, to make sure that as secure as possible. Shift a little to talk, again, we talked about AI at the beginning. Andrea, you're a co-founder and CPO of Nozomi. How do you see AI and machine learning transforming real-time threat detection response across OT environments? And what are some key opportunities and challenges that organizations operationalize infrastructure and their overall?
Yeah, so let me answer to this question in two ways, right? I think the first part, I will take the other angle, right? I'm coming from the hacking community, right? Always been a white hacker, but that's how I started. And obviously part of the job that we do with our company is, in order to gain intelligence and protect our critical infrastructure, is we look at what is happening in the hacking community. And one thing that I can tell you, that beside any base words that there is out there, and now every company is trying to add the label, we're doing AI, because if you don't say that, you're not a cool company. But if you if you remove that part, what I can tell you is that the skills that you needed 15 years ago or 20 years ago when I was doing my PhD to build a malware they were much higher 20 years ago than the skill that you need today to build a much more sophisticated malware. So, and this is due also to the AI. So there is tools that give you the possibility to build a cyber weapon, not probably super sophisticated, not capable to destroy the world, obviously, but enough to make some damage to some company and make some money. So accessibility for malware and virus, because of AI, it became very easy, and you don't need to be an hacker, or you don't need to be overcompetent. So that's is one angle to see, right? AI is making an impact because now you see malware and virus much more than what we see 5 years ago, and AI is helping in building those type of piece of code. Obviously, on the other side, there is good things that we can do by using AI. And I didn't share at the beginning of my story, right? But after I finished the PhD, instead of fund the company where I am one of the founder, I worked for 4 years in a big oil and gas company. I was there with the responsibility to protect the critical infrastructure of this big oil and gas European company. I travel a lot in Nigeria, Congo, Tunisia. And, one of the things that, I see when I was there is that we spent inside the company 90% of the time connecting dots and try to understand exactly what was going on from the cybersecurity perspective, and only 10% to really take strategic decision useful for the business. So we're wasting a lot of cycle, not wasting, but it was required a lot of effort to really understand what was possible to do in order to reduce the risk into the company and understand what was going on. And I think the big opportunity that a lot of company has right now, and from the technology perspective, but also on the other side for who is trying to protect the business without disrupting the business, because that is very important, is using AI to try to be a little bit more strategic, and using the AI to connect some of those dots that usually has been was done by manual security engineer. And I think that is an opportunity. So AI can make the difference in try to help the company to be more strategic and less tactical, and also to save money and be more efficient in reducing the risk. I have a very particular point of view because I protect critical infrastructure. So we're not doing cybersecurity as a generalist. So our solution is installed in what is vital for our society. So obviously, if you have a false positive, as is called in cybersecurity, so if you have a technology that is telling you that something is wrong and is blocking something in an IT environment, maybe some of you is going to be upset because one of your email goes on the spam, or a website is going to be blocked. But it's manageable. If you have the AI telling that you have a problem, and you're trying to block something in a power plant, and that is not a cybersecurity threat, you have the risk to stop the power plant, and that is not acceptable. So in the sector where I'm coming from, adopting AI, yes, the company are very skeptical at the moment. And they're trying to be very careful in how they implemented it on a critical infrastructure, because false positive, not even one, is acceptable. So if you block something, you need to be very sure that that is a cybersecurity issue. Otherwise, you can make more damage than what the cybersecurity attack is supposed to do.
Keynote, the Secretary of Homeland Security for the United States talked about secure by design. In the last administration, there were a lot of companies who agreed to kind of the secure by design principles, and it sounds like the Trump administration will continue that and look at procurement policy to continue embedding that throughout the US government and their procurement and adoption of AI products and services. Digital identity system. foster greater trust and that they're looking at revisiting the EU cybersecurity. Are there any kind of early indicators or feedback meeting or more?
Thank you. Thanks. So indeed, I mean, this has also been a very big part of the conversations that we've been having here, of course, because we have the Cyber Resilience Act, which is our, let's say, most important piece of work in this field. We do come in Europe, I think, from a long tradition of having very high security standards in the field of products. I mean, we've been working a lot around certification already in the past. And then, of course, with the Cyber Resilience Act, it was a very big game changer in the sense that the Cyber Resilience Act mandates security by design to products that are to be placed on the market in Europe. And we cover, I normally say, literally everything. There are, of course, exceptions, but it is a very broad scope that we're applying it. So I think for our point of view, there's a lot of work going on now in Brussels to make this law implementable. It will start to apply fully from 27. So it does give a couple of years now for the transition period. And there's a lot of work going on our side to make sure that we have the standards ready, that, you know, we have the technical definitions ready, but also that we're able to support our businesses, because it is going to be quite a journey for them that they need to go on, because they need to already now start to embed the concepts in their development processes. This is not something you can do overnight or towards the end. So there's a lot of work going on, including, by the way, also looking at how we can develop AI solutions to help companies with all the different requirements. It's an area where we've had, of course, also in the past, very good discussions with the American administration. We've been working closely with CISA in the past around security by design as part of this more global initiative. And I think it's an area where there's just a lot of global interest in what we're doing, because, you know, it becomes standard setting because it's a market regulation. Then when it comes to the work we're doing now on the Cybersecurity Act, so Cybersecurity Act is actually a broad act. It's what establishes our cyber agency. So it's mandate. It's also what establishes our certification framework. And this is an area, of course, where we need to look at how do we ensure a good interplay between Cyber Resilience Act and the certification framework we had. And more importantly, how do we make sure that we have a solid certification framework that works, that produces certification schemes, etc. So there's a lot of work going on in this space. And the last thing we're looking at as well, which also has links over to the Cyber Resilience Act, is that we're undertaking, I would call it major simplification effort. So we're looking at literally all legislation that is out there in the cyber field and to see how can we, what are the changes that are needed, where do we have overlaps, or is there duplication and so on. So we're running it through, I would say, big test in terms of simplification to make sure that, you know, there's no extra burden, unnecessary burden on our companies. So that's also part of the big story there.
Question, Casper, is what would you recommend for organizations that have recommendations or want to highlight challenges in terms of implementing, you know, implementation of CRA provisions or there are people in the audience who aren't familiar with the consultation.
Yes.
So how would you recommend organizations or individuals contribute?
Yeah. So indeed, we have an open consultation now on the Cybersecurity Act. I don't remember where the website is. You can come and ask me afterwards, or you can also look it up. So that's But that's certainly a good place to start, of course. Then for the implementation of the Cyber Resilience Act, we've been working, of course, we have an expert group that has been set up for this, where we work also with industry. There's a lot of work going on in the standardization organizations, which I think it's a very important point for companies that want to be involved more within the specific areas, their product areas. And then I would simply also, really recommend that if you have specific concerns, please reach out to us, because we very much enjoy learning where we have issues and what we can do to actually make it simpler. And, we're thinking now also, what kind of guidance do we need? What are the kind of products we need to develop to make sure that we can ease this transformation for our businesses?
Yeah.
So I think for us, it's really important to have this contact with the industry community.
Yeah. No, I again would encourage folks and organizations to engage now. There is an open consultation, as you mentioned. But Casper, I want to turn to you, because we're again talking about building digital trust. I mean, that's important for organizations, for business to business customers. So Zscaler being a cloud-based cybersecurity firm, I'm curious from your perspective, can cloud-based security solutions help build greater digital trust, especially in these complex threat environments? What are your thoughts on that?
Yes.
How does Zscaler kind of, from that perspective, how does Zscaler kind of recommend using cloud-based solutions to address some of those challenges and build digital trust? Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's very, very nice of you to have a leading question that enables me to talk a little bit about the wonderful aspects of having a cloud solution on cybersecurity. But I'm actually surprised that you didn't mention before that Digital Europe would be a good way to enter into the consultations and
This
give
is true.
responses.
If you're a member,
Exactly,
if you are a member, and if
Okay,
you'd like
good.
to join, come talk to me.
Yeah, I used to sit on the executive board, so I guess I have to say some nice words about Digital Europe. Yeah. Listen, I think, in general, I think there are many aspects of how we increase resilience. And needless to say, representing the company that I do, we think the cloud is absolutely instrumental in providing state-of-the-art solutions. And if I can just add a small personal anecdote into the mix here. So in 2017, on the 27th of June, I was working for the Danish government. I was the ambassador to Indonesia when NotPetya hit a fairly big logistical company coming out of Denmark, Maersk. It's not a secret at all. And I still remember receiving the phone call in Jakarta from the regional representative of Maersk saying, our system is completely down. We have a big container vessel arriving every day in the harbor in Jakarta and a couple of the other places where I was accredited to. We don't know what is in each container. We need special permissions by the local authorities to offload these containers in the harbor. And I think that's just a small example of how devastating some of these cybersecurity attacks can be. And I think if you look back over the last couple of years, the unfortunate aspect of it has been that you need sort of a titanic experience to really take this seriously and invest in cybersecurity. And we have colleagues from Ukraine sitting in the room today. And I think in many ways, what you guys are doing in defending your society, I would add defending Europe against aggression, that is very much hybrid these days. There is a lot of lessons to be learned by those of us that are not at the front line, and enormous respect to what you're doing and what your compatriots are doing as well. But I think these days people understand that it's not just a theoretical issue. It's not only the most well-known companies, organizations that are going to be, in the line of these kind of attacks, and that requires all of us to invest more in it. And if I may, since you were, foolish enough to pass the microphone to me, add one thing. I think, the elephant in the room these days, which is very much part of the discussions here in the RSA, is of course whether the geopolitical instability that we're facing right now, whether that is going to lead to a different kind of focus on strategic autonomy or digital sovereignty in Europe. And I will not be unfriendly and ask Christiane to answer this question, but I do think that many of us experiencing European stakeholders, European companies, European public sector becoming slightly more concerned about utilizing non-European technology. And I get that. I'm European, as you can hear from my accent. I've been a firm promoter of the fact that Europe needs to do more, and I think it's great to have European companies that are doing great. I would just add one thing. In times of turmoil, I think it is incredibly important that we focus on external enemies, that we work together, And I'm not going to do a pitch because there are market opportunities in Europe. I would just say that we experience also as a company, a lot of our customers saying, we don't want to do that right now. We want to postpone decisions to invest in state-of-the-art technology. And we get that from a political point of view. The problem is that short-term, that actually reduces resilience at a moment where the risks are going through the roof and where we have to make sure that everybody, small companies, medium-sized companies, the backbone of the European economy, will do a lot more to defend themselves against the aggressors that are out there. And yes, what we saw in Spain and Portugal was not, I think, a cybersecurity attack, but I think it was a very good demonstration of the consequences of taking out critical infrastructure. And yes, cloud-based solutions are fantastic to do that.
Yeah.
Was that a good ending?
Yeah,
to sort of
but
come
I
back to
have
your
a
question?
follow-up because, obviously, you just mentioned, the investment by organizations. And I'm just curious, based off your experience and engaging individuals who sit on the board or being a part of the board. I mean, what does it take for organizations to have that discussion and make those investments? Is it the wait and see until the big incident happens, or is it a risk-based approach? Is it what do we need to incentivize our boards and also empower our CISOs and our security executives to be able to go to the board, ask for the investment, and tell them, like, this isn't just the right thing to do, it is a must, right? It goes back to this is about cybersecurity by design. So I'm curious what you're seeing, what Zscaler is seeing with its customers, and what are those conversations at that board?
Yeah, so a couple of points on that. I mean, I think the first one is to say that, being a former civil servant, a former diplomat, I think most of us who've been in that business understand that the best driver for change is fear. Unfortunately, if you have significant risks, that is a very powerful way of getting organizations to adapt. And when we look at the world, it's difficult not to have a little bit of fear out there in terms of what we're seeing. So I think that's the first game changer. And then, having worked for the institutions for many years, I actually want to say, and this might come as a surprise, something positive about the regulatory framework of the European Union. I think there is this, cliche that the US innovates, China copies, Europe regulates. And I think in many ways it's complete BS on a lot of different angles. And Andrea, you can probably speak to the innovative part of Europe as well. But I do think that the regulatory framework, including the NIS2 directive, the work that Christian and others are doing, that forces organizations to take this more seriously. We also know there are penalties for boards if they don't do what is right, including in cybersecurity. So I think that is helpful. Then we can discuss whether the European Union goes a little bit too far and whether there is inconsistent implementation among the EU 27 member states. But that perhaps is a discussion for later. But I think those are important aspects in driving change forward. And then, last but not least, I think, with some of the stuff that we're seeing also at the political level, for most of us, and again, speaking with enormous respect for the Ukrainians in this room, for most of us, the most immediate threat is not troops going across our borders, but it is in fact the cybersecurity attacks that we see on a daily basis. And one area where I might disagree a little bit with Andrea to get a little bit of spice into the discussion in terms of whether people are reluctant to utilize AI and cybersecurity. I mean, that's not our impression. I mean, our impression is the exact opposite. Our customers are very eager to use Gen AI and artificial intelligence if it increases resilience, if it reduces the burden, because I think the burden and the resource demand is one of the important aspects. The unfortunate side of it that both of you explained as well, and we know that from our own threat assessment, is that AI has increased the sophistication and the volume of attacks that we are seeing. And we monitor 500 million transactions per day. And we see this moving in one direction, which is AI is both an opportunity, but unfortunately, it's sort of an arms race. And it also makes it easier for those who do not want to do as good things to be unhelpful in terms of attacking organizations.
Rashawn, did you want to follow up?
Well, I think Casper almost did my infomercial for me, because I want to say, I think, absolutely. I mean, this is a Danish way of doing business. No, I wanted to say, I actually very much agree that NIS2 is a real game changer for us because it brings a cybersecurity discussion into the boardroom. It puts the responsibility at the board level and not with the CISOs. And that has been a big game changer. And I think when we're talking, in the CISO community, etc., in Europe, this is what comes out, now, we're being asked to come and present. They care about the numbers. They care about the investments done in it. And I think for me, this is like one of the big changes that are like very positive coming out of NIS2. I'll give you the
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and when you talk about regulation also, I think, there is regulation in general, and the stereotype that you were saying, I keep hearing the stereotype. But on the other side, when you look at critical infrastructure, that again is what I do, United States is not behind Europe, or better, they're trying to look at what Europe did. And in particular, vertical, now they're ahead of Europe. For example, NERC-CIP for energy company in United States is extremely regulated, as it's a very clear regulation with very clear rules, and every energy company in the United States need to follow. So, so I think I agree on both of you on that aspect. I think a regulation in this specific aspect, it will help a company to understand what is a good level of investment that they should do, right? And if you think about it, let me do this analogy that you may agree or not, right? But there was a time they were driving without seatbelt, right? And there was a risk perception that was okay, right? Probably my grandfather was like, I don't know why they add these rules. I don't think I'm gonna get hurted by, also doing like that with his hands, exactly. So, but anyway, just allow me to say that example, to say very simple, to say, sometimes regulation are helping people and organizations that are focused on different things. They not have the luxury to be focused on the problem every day because they're running a business, to understand that they should do a little investment now in order to prevent a bigger investment later. So I think regulation in this specific space, if done properly, can be extremely good.
I want to keep pulling that thread, and I want to follow up with you on, we're in Silicon Valley, we're a hotbed of tech startups. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on, those who are starting out their businesses, especially in the tech space? Trust is everything, right? Especially around security. So what are your thoughts on steps, like practical steps organizations can take, whether it's at the startup or the corporate stage, on making sure that we have these cybersecurity principles in the organization, from development and to deployment? I think that's critical. I mean, absent of rules and regulations, because these aren't everywhere, right? So how do we get everybody to implement these security principles from the start of these businesses, growing?
Yeah, that is a very good question, right? Because we talk about regulation for critical infrastructure and particular sectors. I think there is, regulation about cybersecurity from the high-level perspective, when a company starts to treat data that are, also related to privacy and other stuff. There is a lot of angle that we can touch in there. So probably, a regulation there will be very heavy. What it was my experience as a startups, that no one at the beginning certified that what I developed was secure.
Wow.
So I was doing security, but I never had anyone from the regulation perspective coming to me and saying, you're selling a software. And let's say when the company was much smaller than what it is right now, we already have some big customer and they were trusting us, but there was no regulation checking that the software that I was building was done securely. So, sometimes you assume that a company that does cybersecurity software, they know how to do secure software, but, it's an assumption. As every assumption, sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not. I would say there is education now for a big company to come to us and saying, certify that you are secure, right? And it doesn't exist a certification, but it comes to, show best practices, show that you are taking third parties, try to assess your software. So I would say at the moment, what I can tell about what I'm seeing is that there is a good attitude in try to make sure that if you produce software, you're doing software in a secure way, especially if you're a new tech company. I'm sure also at Zscaler, there is tons of practices to make sure that everyone is developing the software in a secure way. But that part is not regulated, at least from my experience for what we're doing.
Well, it sounds like there has to be, to build the trust, that partnership and cooperation. So Casper, I'm curious, from your vantage point working with governments, can you talk about, cooperation and how that's evolving, especially the role of digital diplomacy in terms of building these global cybersecurity frameworks? Number one, but then I think back to an earlier remark that Christiane made was about harmonization, because she's been in these meetings meetings, what are you seeing in terms of meetings with governments around getting cybersecurity harmonization, whether it's from the standards and frameworks perspective or rules and regulations? I think about cyber incident response, right? I mean, we have certain countries that say you can respond in 2 weeks. We have the US that has a critical infrastructure rule that's 72 hours. And then, you know, even within the US, we have the Securities and Exchange Commission. You have 4 days to respond or go to the Attorney General and ask for an exemption, right? So it's all these different journeys we're on incident reporting. So just curious what you're seeing in terms of those, you know, engagements from a digital diplomacy perspective, and what we're seeing in terms of the drive to more cybersecurity harmonization around some of these regulations.
Yeah, and I think I probably have to be a little bit careful what I say here, because I think there is a situation before a date in January, and then there's a situation after a date in January. I would say, I mean, when you represent a private company, and I think we're probably on the same page here, you know, consistency in standards and frameworks is incredibly important. You have to make sure that there is a sort of a level playing field, so you know what you have to live up to. And, you know, since I was so nice to Christiane before, then I guess I can say a little bit of criticism in the direction of the European Commission, because I think one of the aspects, for example, in this two directive is this inconsistent implementation among the EU 27 member states, which makes it super difficult for companies to live up to it. And just remember, compliance is not security. I think that's sort of one of the fundamental aspects of what we're seeing. And when we as a company are told and can read in the legislative framework that if you are compliant in the country you do your majority of business in, then it should be applicable in the remaining 27 member states, but it doesn't really work like that in practice. Then it is a huge administrative burden. And one of the things, if I go back to when I was still working in government, one of the bizarre aspects of, you know, legislation or regulatory frameworks, including, for example, the GDPR. I remember when I was, you know, stationed over here and I was doing the job that you guys are doing here now. And I was going to meet with some of the big US technology companies. In the beginning, they were complaining every single meeting about GDPR, how terrible it was, how much the European Union was shooting itself in the foot. And I remember very clearly that ended one day to the other, and then they stopped complaining about GDPR. And I was sort of wondering, why was that the case, until I realized, it took me a long time. It probably says more about me, but it was because some of the big technology companies realized that this was a business opportunity for them, because it is much easier to be compliant. It is much easier to allocate resources to be compliant if you are a very big company rather than a small and medium-sized enterprise coming out of Europe. So I think, you know, being a European, although I work for a US technology company, I'm very, very eager to see Europe prosper and scale more companies in Europe. But I think we have to, you know, be very, very clear on how we square the circle on regulatory frameworks, which are necessary, but also avoiding regulatory frameworks where the compliance requirements are so heavy that they actually undermine the small and medium-sized enterprises in Europe. And I'm not sure we squared the circle on this one. And, you know, with your permission, this is very dangerous with the audience that we have here. I actually wanted to ask sort of a question. I mean, do you think that the aggregation of regulations in Europe on the cybersecurity side, let me ask two questions. Do you think that will increase the resilience of Europe against cybersecurity attack? Could you raise your hands? How many thinks it increases resilience? I'm actually surprised, because I thought there were a lot of diplomats here, so I thought there would be a room with a lot of hands. But then we ask another question. Do you think the regulatory framework of the European Union makes it easier for Andrea and people like Andrea to develop startups that will scale in Europe? Okay, I rest my case. And I'm not saying this to be provocative. I'm just saying that I think we have a common responsibility, including working closely with regulators, in making sure that we square the circle on this one, so that we don't only play into the hands of the very big ones, that we also enable, you know, innovation in Europe and having companies that can compete, including with the company that I represent right now.
I love it. Yeah, go ahead. Follow up.
I'm obviously going to have to reply to that one, Casper. I said, I'm obviously going to have to reply to that one. Yeah, such a surprise. I think it's a great survey we did here, for sure. But I also want to say, I think there's a very good reason why there's a lot of jurisdictions in the world that are looking to what we have done in the field of critical infrastructure regulation, for instance. There's a lot of actually benefit coming out of it. We've seen it now in terms of raising the bar on cyber resilience within our entities, in terms of putting in those very good, basic, good practices that you need even more when you have AI-based attacks. So I don't think there is a lot of discussions around whether it has helped to raise the bar in the companies, because a lot of our entities are also telling us, yeah, of course, we know that these are the things we should be doing. We're not asking anything outrageous in terms of requirements for our critical entities. It's not super high level, plus it's proportional and risk-based. Now, the next question we have to ask ourselves is on the compliance, because I don't think it's not the actual security measures that are at issue. I think it's when we come for the compliance part, you know, the checks, the supervisory. It's those things that keep the CEOs up at night, because it's also a regime with sanctions. So I think that's the part where we need to focus on to make sure that the compliance part is simple. And this is actually one of the parts that we're doing, because as I said before, we are looking overall on simplification. We are looking at, I think, you know, you're not the first one to tell me either that, you know, when you need to implement a directive in 27 different countries, it doesn't always harmonize fully. So there are, of course, things that we can do there as well to make sure that it becomes simpler. But I don't think we should go and say, you know, having rules in place on how to do basic cybersecurity for our critical entities is a bad thing. I also don't think, it's kind of what I took from you. No. Yeah. But I also think, and it's same thing, now we talk critical entities, I also want to talk about products, because, you know, every time we have opened the hood and looked into a major cyber incident where we have seen vulnerabilities being exploited, and you mentioned also before, can we trust companies to actually take the right security decisions, even the ones that are providing very critical software in our critical entities? I think we have seen incidents where that has certainly not been the case. And I think it's important as well that we put in a trust framework around this. And this is what we're doing with product security rules, right? It is about increasing the trust in the products. And again, lots of it has been done to be proportionate, to make sure that, you know, we're not slapping a big certification on the vast majority of products. We are on some of them, the ones where we know that we will have very, very high level impact if there are incidents. But those are the ones that are the very most critical. So I think our approach has been very careful. You can tell me if there are things where we should have been even more careful. But to ensure that, you know, there are products that really require high trust, and then there's more broader products where you can do self-assessment, etc. But you should not go around the fact that you need to do security.
Andrea, I was going to say, I wanted to see what your perspective was, especially from a startup perspective. Like, how do we find that happy balance of not getting in the middle of, you know, trying to get that minimum viable product, right, to get to a customer, but also not sacrificing security and trust, but not creating a regulatory regime that hinders innovation? What are you observing, and where are there changes we need to make? Are we in the EU specifically? Have we done too much?
Yeah, let me say, I think you know, it's very hard, right? Because when you're a startup, as we said, you need to be, you know, you need to use every single resource that you have in order to build the technology. Right. But on the other side now, by being probably on the other side and not being anymore a startup, so obviously I have the privilege, because we're selling basically all over, you know, all over the world, and we have installation all over the world. You know, I think the European Union have the opportunity to create a very good regulatory around product that has been installed in critical infrastructures. I tell you 3 different examples. Australia, so which they have a very precise regulation, but they didn't implement it, but it's very well written. And you need to follow certain things, but there is no formal certification. Then there is France, that they took the leadership in Europe, not as a you know, for pushing this in entire Europe, but in general in France. If you want to install a product in one of the energy company in France, you need to be ANSI certified. And you know, it took for us almost 2 years. And they looked at every single line of the code. Before the tension between Europe and Russia were at the level they are right now, we had also customer in Russia, and but we couldn't install anything inside a critical infrastructure in Russia that was controlled by the government, because of the rules that they put in place was too much in order to, you know, let go through that certification. And then we have United States that has been now for many, many years. It's impossible to work with any federal entity if they're not going to sit with you and look at every line of your code and basically certify that your code doesn't have backdoors. So we are fully certified to work with entity in America. There is no, uniform regulation in Europe. France has a very strict one, but other country they didn't have anyone in specific. So I think that is an opportunity in order to do something. Obviously, it's it's hard to tell where the balance is, because if you then are a cybersecurity company done by 20 people, and you're aiming to sell to those type of company, you cannot afford a process like the one that was in Australia, or the one that we did in France, or the one that we did in America. For us, was an heavy investment, even when the company was over 100 people. It was a very important investment that we have to do it, and it was not easy.
Casper.
Listen, I'm not going to defend myself against Cristiano, so don't worry, be safe. I actually don't disagree too much, and I think you guys heard that. I don't think there's a contradiction between representing a private sector company and actually welcoming regulation. And those of us with a little bit more gray hair remember that in the 70s, I mean, what actually led to the green transition or the focus on sustainable development of energy was very much the regulatory framework in making it harder to use fossil fuels. So I think there is this idea, I think you mentioned at the beginning, something I use quite often, that you need a tide that rises on ships, and I think that's very much where the regulatory framework is. Then there are some challenges, and I think this is where I love the word coming from Cristiano saying simplification is going to be one of the focus areas of the European Commission. I think that's the right way forward. And then being very cynical and old, I would just say, one of the problems with European institutions, of course, that the European Commission is very much focused on developing regulatory frameworks and policy frameworks. So I think it's great if we can see the simplification model moving ahead. What I would say is that I think the main obstacle, and going back to your point, Andrea, for having successful European companies, including in the cybersecurity domain, is not necessarily only the regulatory framework. It is also the absence of a single market that actually works in practice. And as a European, and I had a little bit of a background also working for a trade association, when you speak to European small enterprises and even medium-sized enterprises, and you ask them, why are you not scaling more in Europe? Why is it that when an American hedge fund comes by and says, do you want to be acquired and come and live in sunny California, they'll say, absolutely, let's go. One of the reasons is because they find it incredibly difficult to look at the EU 27 member states as a uniform market where you can offload your products. So going back to the Letta report, to the Draghi report, I think that's actually one of the areas. It's not only about the regulatory framework, it's also about creating a single market without any hindrances or obstacles, so the European companies, including the cybersecurity domain, can be successful. It was a poor defense against, the vicious attack of Cristiano against what I said before. But as you can hear, I'm schizophrenic because I spent most of my career working for governments and the EU institutions, so I'm actually not that much against the regulatory framework. I'm just saying that there is a compliance burden that should not be underestimated right now. And even for big companies, we're unknown, but we have 9,000 people, huge market cap. Even for us, looking into what we need to do to be compliant is a burden that should not be underestimated.
100%.
Let me add one thing, because you touched me in a point that I feel I'm very sensitive. I extremely agree with you on what you said on the market, right? It's extremely easier to scale up a company when you are in the United States. And let me tell you something that maybe sounds a little bit political, but I feel European. I'm Italian, but I feel European. And I think we have an opportunity. And right now, I know we have a lot of cultures, different culture. We have, hundreds of years of history that United States doesn't have to deal with, and we have to. But, the opportunity is there. I mean, as a company, when you build a company, one more step on my company. I built a company starting from Europe. But today, my company has their headquarters in the United States. And the reason why we're the leader in the market is because we came here. I don't think we had the possibility to be the leader in the market by staying in Europe. And one thing is, even today, our cost of generating $1 in the United States is much more attractive than what we spend in Europe, because every market is different, every regulation is different. We are 27 states, and even when something has been decided, then every government need to apply what the European Commission decided. So I know what I'm dreaming is probably impossible in the short term, but having a real European Commission with one person deciding ahead of the European Commission, and that's it. And that doesn't have to be, moving down to every state, every parliament, every prime minister of every state. I think that will be, a dreaming scenario, probably impossible, but that would be the way to be competitive in a world where United States is bigger than Europe and a bigger market than Europe. And, there is one, good or bad, there is one man deciding, and still, or a woman, yes, man or a woman, absolutely. And the same things for, some of the other bigger states. So now I'm moving a little bit away from regulation, but it's a reality, right? Scaling a company in Europe, it will be in this condition and in the short term, much more harder than scaling a company in the United States. This is by design.
So we are heading towards the end, and I'm going to ask my panelists one more round of questions, but we're going to move to Q&A in just a minute. So if you have a question, get it ready. For Christian, I'm curious, how is the EU leveraging digital partnerships with global partners to strengthen cybersecurity cooperation and resilience? And how do these initiatives contribute to forming kind of a more secure rule-based digital environment, both domestically and internationally? And then for Casper and Andrea, think about public-private partnerships with governments and organizations. How do you all feel that those help drive resiliency, or does something else need to happen? I think about this in the context of information sharing, because sometimes we hear complaints from organizations, a lot of information goes up to the government, but not enough coming down. So are there things that we could do to strengthen public-private partnerships across all areas of private sector?
Thanks. So for us, I think in the last couple of years, you've seen actually a quite significant increase in the work we're doing internationally. Beyond, I would say, the classic diplomacy and the work in the United Nations. We are working quite closely now with a number of countries, our like-minded partners. We have cyber dialogues on a regular basis. But we also work very closely, and I mean, we keep coming back on the standards and the technical.
Yeah.
But it's important for us that we're having these discussions also with the different countries that are implementing similar rules. So, Japan, for instance, is a very good example also of a jurisdiction that we work a lot with, because we're very much on the same page when it comes to IoT. I think when you're looking forward, this is something it will only increase. Right? Let's say the adversaries, we share very much the same picture in terms of who are the adversaries. It's very beneficial for all of us of exchanging this information, of course, between governments and the private sector. But then, of course, the next steps are also, beyond the sharing of information, how can we work together on making our industries, our products more resilient? And I think there's a very good global part in that. Another area where there's a lot of interest also to work together is around ransomware specifically. I think that's a topic that brings together a lot of countries that don't normally talk, because here we're really dealing with combating cybercrime. So it is a field where I think that more is happening also around ransomware, about creating the right coalitions, and it's a part where we also really want to be present in.
Yeah, I think I think the collaboration is crucial, is important, and but then goes back on how easy it is building that collaboration, and how you can devote the right amount of resources as a company. I mean, if you're a gigantic company, it's easy, but if you are a smaller company, how many resources you need to devote in order to build that collaboration? Again, we tried, but I'm coming from Europe. I think I know better Europe than United States even now, and I'm now here for 5 years. But my company is collaborating very deeply with the American government, but we couldn't build any collaboration at a European level and at any local level in Europe. A little bit in France, as I said, but that's it. We added the same amount of resources. We added the same amount of people. And right now, 50% of our revenue are coming from the collaboration with the American government, with adult desks. Obviously, they request us something in particular, and in return, they're investing on us. We couldn't build the same things at least we're not able to figure it out how to do it. Probably other company they were, but not us. So that was my experience.
Yeah. So, I mean, a couple of points, and again, using Ukraine as the example, because I think these days we need to be very focused on what happens with and in Ukraine. I think there's a major difference, and our Ukrainian colleagues will correct me if I'm wrong, between the aggressor's forces that went over the border. I mean, that the response was a military response using, defense forces. The hybrid element, when it comes to the cybersecurity attack that took place in parallel with the physical, violation of the sovereignty. What is the big difference? Well, the big difference, I think, is many of the first responders when it came to the cybersecurity attacks were not only the public sector, it was very much the private sector that had to step in, help defend, protect, store data sets to make sure the Ukrainian institutions and, the Ukrainian state would continue to operate. So I think whether we like it or not, the private sector plays an instrumental role when it comes to cybersecurity. And that, of course, brings me to the question that you asked, public-private partnerships. There is no other way.
Yeah.
We have to collaborate. And again, being a little bit biased in terms of when we set up the tech embassy back in the day, working with many in the room, I mean, the amount of criticism that I've received was incredible, saying, now Denmark is sucking up to the private sector, it's just here for commercial interest. And very few people understood that it was a political role. It was not a commercial role. And without this becoming sort of a history discussion, I would just say diplomacy has always been about putting people into hotspots of transformation. And these days, one of the transformation points is technology and what the private sector is doing, not least in the cybersecurity domain. So I think we need to work together. One of the difficult aspects, I'm sure you're facing that as well, was to get the private sector to understand why they had to increase the collaboration and the conversations with the public sector. I think we're in a different spot today. So I think there is momentum around it. Again, finishing on the transatlantic relationship, I would just say that I think one of the success stories in the past that didn't receive a lot of recognition was actually the Trade and Technology Council. You can answer what kind of resource did it deliver, but it was an avenue for collaboration on technology issues between Brussels and Washington, D.C. And I think also in the absence of perhaps the strength of the transatlantic relationship we've had in the past, we need to invent something to increase that kind of dialogue. And it needs to involve also the private sector on both sides. And we need to make sure the private sector will also feel a responsibility for sticking together in times of challenges.
Love it. So we have time for some questions. I think I don't know if we have a microphone. Oh, okay, perfect.
Hello.
Hi, my name is Gillian Manis. I run a venture fund here in San Francisco, and I'm also background defense. So 2 questions or 3. One, I think the 28th regime hopefully will create some sort of, some entrance for a better market landscape for cybersecurity and all innovation to obviously be adopted across Europe in a much more expeditious way, hopefully. So that's just to that. But to Nozomi, where does your IP live? Does it live here or does it live in Europe? Because that's a very critical piece to all of this. And I know you're smiling, so go ahead.
Yeah, so it's our IP is living in Europe.
Okay, and the funding for your company came from where?
Majority in the United States.
Okay, and was there any pressure in order to bring the IP here?
I'll stop here because it's becoming a delicate topic, but
This is very position.
So yes.
Okay, because that's one of the big critical problems here is that most of the venture funds here are limited partner agreements won't allow us to invest into Europe unless the IP, right, is a Dell Corp. And so there is a bit of a problem, but that's not, it's something to discuss on this. The one big question is you have an 800 billion defense budget now being deployed over the next 10 years in Europe for Rearm Europe. What percentage of that would you like to see go to cybersecurity, and how is that being intentionally directed towards cybersecurity, which I think is fundamental?
Andrea, would you like to repeat your answer for the Zoomers on the IP?
Yeah, this is a very delicate topic for us as a company. So, but yes, the question was related to obviously where the IP stays, since we are a dual company and we develop part of that in Europe, but we are an American entity company, and for the majority of our funding are coming from United States. That's why we're here. So, and yes, right now, the discussion about where the IP need to stay, it's a very active discussion. Also because in our cap table, we have In-Q-Tel. And, In-Q-Tel is the vehicle that United States use to find interesting company that they can serve, let's say the agencies or the army in United States. They invest on company that they think are very strategic. And In-Q-Tel invested in Nozomi. This is public. I'm not sharing anything that is not public. But nowadays, the IP question, especially with the latest tension, become extremely hot for in general, also for the relation in particular between Europe and United States. And I'll stop there.
So for your question on the defense, I think it's a really good thing that now with, the most recent defense white paper, it also recognizes cyber as a domain. I think that's a good achievement. I think it's important also that we're talking about offensive capabilities, the need to have an offensive capability program, voluntary, of course. As well as linking in and making the link over to the protection of critical infrastructure to cybersecurity as well. I'm not going to give you a figure if you're after that, because I think it's also, we're having the discussions now with the member states. There are a lot of needs. Of course, we have needs in the cyber domain, but let's be honest, it's across the board. So I think the key thing is that we're looking at now with the member states, how do we build the, on the one hand, the strategic agenda for it, but the other hand also, we have a point in it which is more focused on, how do we deploy deep tech for our defense? How do we work together on establishing a technological rearmament roadmap, as we call it, which is also very much around bringing technology to the defense sector, but also bringing the defense sector to where we're developing technologies, because, it needs to go both ways. And that's a lot of work we're doing in Europe around this. We're doing it already around the work around our AI factories, the AI continent action plan we're coming out with. You will see there as well that there's a big reflection of actually bringing security and defense sector into it. So I think it's not only about putting, cyber into the defense, but it's also that we mainstream it in all the relevant actions that we're taking.
I'm Niels Pullman. I'm founder of a cybersecurity company and originally from Europe. I was also a CISO at 5 public companies and co-founder of a cloud security alliance. So I've been doing this for a little bit. I listened to what you were all saying, and the one thought that came to my mind is that never in the history have we built good cybersecurity through compliance or regulation. Never, ever before. So if we can change the discussion into what incentives are you creating for the companies who want to do the right thing? And number 2, what initiatives do you have, or do you have enough to build cybersecurity talent in order to drive down the cost of doing security, which is still very, very expensive for small companies? I feel these are the areas where Europe needs to push hard, less on the regulation side, because I think we have tried this for a long time. And I have never seen a company that got great security because they followed some sort of regulation. But I think it's an opportunity in a large market to incentivize people to get them interested in the topic of cybersecurity as a career, because this is what's going to drive cultural change. It's not some sort of law that you just incentivize more lawyers that interpret it and help companies to check the box.
Let's take another one and then we bundle them.
Last question.
Yeah, so I'm Fergus Hay, the founder of the Hacking Games. We are stopping kids falling into cybercrime and redirecting them to becoming ethical hackers to fill the labor deficit. I wanted to share with you 2 data points. So as we all know, the world is going to lose $24 trillion to cybercrime in 2027. That's the GDP of the US, pre-tariffs. The second interesting point of that is that we think the bad guys are nation states, which they are. But the data out of the FBI and the NCA and Europol shows you that 8 out of 10 New York teenagers have hacked someone by the age of 16. 69% of European teenagers have committed a cybercrime. So what we have is a generation who have got all the access and all the aptitude to be hackers, but with no direction. And they're sliding down the pathway to becoming criminal hackers when in fact they're not naturally criminal. It's an amazing potential workforce. There's 4.8 million unfilled jobs in cybersecurity globally, forecasted to be 12 million by 2027. No one is engaging with this generation of Gen Z, young-minded, gaming-orientated hackers. The only people who are really engaging with them are the criminal gangs, and they're doing a great job recruiting them off Roblox and Minecraft, etc. So I'm a European. I'm building a business also in America. My question for the public sector side is, what can the EU do to identify and harness this talent in order to make us safe in Europe? That's war. And in America, in the private sector and the public sector, what are you guys going to do to enhance this amazing young talent and provide the pathways to make society and private companies safer? Oh, and she told me to say that we just won the RSAC Startup Award, but
Congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations. Let me start first over there, because I want to say I really agree with what you're saying. If we think that by making a law we fix security, then we should not be having our jobs. So the law, as I see it, it's an enabling framework, right? It enables the discussions that you need to have in terms of the investment. It can clarify what needs to be done. And also, I think what we also have to remember is that our law for critical infrastructure is not just a law about how all the entities need to go and do something. It's also a law about how the member states, the CSIRTs, etc., need to actually support our industry in doing this, support our critical entities. So I think for me, NIS2, it's a framework that actually allows for all of this to get going, and also that we have the right conversations in the member states with the entities around what actually constitutes cybersecurity, what you need to do. But we're not going to be done by doing that. So next steps, and here actually you mentioned hospitals just before. We had a hospital action plan that came out, I think it was in January or February, where we're actually taking that exact point of departure where we're saying there is a law in place, that's not enough. Now, what are we going to do to help our hospitals improve cybersecurity? Because we know that these are entities that don't have tons of cash. We also know that these are entities that are really targeted by ransomware. So what are the tools at our disposal that we can actually help in terms of guidance, in terms of investments, to put up a voucher scheme? How can we roll out tools across the board that will help our hospitals? So that's very much also where the focus is now. You know, we got the legislative work done, but now we need to make it happen on the ground. So that's, I think, a very important part. That brings us to, of course, the skills question, because who's going to do all of this? That's a big question for us, right? In Europe, we're estimating around 500,000 jobs that are open, people that are missing in terms of professionals in this field. I actually very much like what you're saying, because now I know where to go and recruit them, right? But I guess what we need to work on is also the pathways into these jobs, right? How do we take, you know, people with certain skills, how do we get people interested in a cybersecurity career? So I think there's a lot of work that we need to do already through education. I know in some countries they do it already. I know actually my kids are starting in Belgium, there are some schemes for it. But, you know, we need to also put in play the different tools we have as governments in order to do it. So I think education plays a very big role. Let's see if we can catch them like that way through. I'm happy to hear other ideas, of course, as well on this part. But we need to have to create these pathways into cybersecurity. And that's a lot of work we're doing already around, we have a Cyber Skills Academy, it's called, project, where we're doing this. There are very interesting links actually also over to defense, because in a lot of countries, we of course see this being part of the work they're doing with conscription, where they're reaching out to people. So, we have a lot of links between civil and military here that we can certainly also leverage to make cybersecurity careers interesting for let's say both the younger ones, but also the ones that can transition into it. So I think quite a lot of stuff going on there, but very happy to hear more input in that front.
Yeah, I will be very quickly. I have a slightly different opinion on both of the questions and it's been asked. I agree that in general, regulation doesn't drive excellence in cybersecurity. But I also agree on what you said at the beginning, that at the end of the day, companies that are not focused on cyber, they invest in cybersecurity for two reasons. One is because they are forced to. There is a regulation and, they don't see really why, but there's a regulation, so I'm investing. I'm going to hire a CISO, and I'll try to ask him to do some investment. Or on the other side, is because of fear, because you perceive the risk. And what I can see at least is that in some cases you have a risk perception that is higher, and in some cases you have a risk perception that is lower. So I agree with you. None of the best technology or cybersecurity talent has been built because of regulation. But I think some companies that are very focused on their business, they may adopt certain countermeasure because there was some regulation helping them to see that there was a risk that they were not seeing because they're not experts. So partially agree and on what you said, and a comment on the other question around the talent. I think this is very interesting, and so congratulations for the award. I would love to connect after. And but one opinion that I have that is slightly different is that commit a cybercrime is extremely easy. So not everyone that is committing a cybercrime is a talent. I think there is no education that you can commit a cybercrime in a very easy way. I see also my kids, they don't understand because they believe their monitor and their keyboard is protecting them, and they may do something that is not correct, but it's, that doesn't mean that they're a talent. It means that they don't have the education, and, it's just when you steal I don't know, some gums from a shop, you're breaking the law, but doesn't make you a great experts on certain things, right? But that's his education. So I think, part of that is also that.
So I'm super happy to be last because we have a lot of vacancies. So I'll come to you first. And the weather in San Jose is fantastic. So I'm sure a lot of Europeans would love to come and work with us. Joke aside, congrats on the prize. Listen, I think there are 2 points going back to your point of view. What is holding a lot of companies back from investing in cybersecurity? And you know much more about this than I do, but let me give you my perspective based on what we do in Zscaler. One is cost. And you can talk about cost in resources or lack of resources, but you can also talk about cost in actual investments. We need to bring down costs in terms of how much cybersecurity will, take back an organization. And I think, I'll throw in a little bit of commercial advertising. But, going to a cloud-based solution actually reduces cost, especially working with public sector. That matters a whole lot. If we can reduce costs, we have the potential to actually increase, rolling out state-of-the-art security for the public sector, not least. The second thing, and I'll end on a slightly more political note, I think with the global situation right now, what are companies concerned about? Well, they're concerned about a massive cybersecurity attack that will take them out. It's an existential issue for a lot of companies. They're also concerned about foreign access to sensitive data sets. It's been a long discussion. You can talk about Schrems and other people in this regard. But the last thing, which I think we're seeing a renaissance around, is fears around traditional espionage. If you run a company, can you be absolutely sure that if you utilize, cloud-based cybersecurity, that your data set will be protected? So I think for companies, it's also a question of innovating technology that ensures, you don't save or share the content of your customers. You give full control back to the customers. You need to also give a sense of cybersecurity through the technology that you provide, that you defend the organization, no matter who wants to have access to the company. I think, especially with the developments in the last couple of months, we're going to see a rise in focus on data sovereignty, to use a different word, and the necessity of the private sector to make sure that we develop technology that fundamentally gives sovereignty, control, safety also to the customers, regardless of where they are geographically. And I'll come after.
No, I appreciate it. So we're going to wrap up. I want to thank you all for joining. Oh, do we have? Yeah, sorry. There's one more question.
Is somebody able to sell more microphones?
So I'm Luca Tagliaretti, I'm the director of the European Cybersecurity Competence Center. I just want to go back on the question on education and young generation. I feel that this is not visible, probably on social media, it's not visible on LinkedIn, but if you have the possibility to visit the cyber agency across Europe, and I bring the example of Europe because that's the one I'm more familiar, you see a lot of activity going on for kids. I'll give you one example, which is the cybersecurity challenge. This is an activity which last year involved more than 24,000 kids across Europe, selection of teams at national level, European competition, worldwide competition. It's a great example of how we engage kids at a level to show them how technology is useful for the benefit. And it's also an example of how you see them cooperating and working with each other. So I think it's probably the comment comes from a position of not knowing how much is happening. Maybe we need to be more visible. Maybe we need to be more communicative in how we push it. But I think this is happening.
We had an initiative to, let's say, animate the members of the teleclass industry, because we are the representative of the German cybersecurity industry, to, let's say, get being active, going into schools, going into the education institutions, and spread the word and of the importance of cybersecurity, and this can have an impact, right? So if you multiply this through our industry, and we have here 44,000 companies, I think, or people in this conference, in the RSA conference, and I think plenty of them are from Europe and also from the US, and here's the same problem. So we should leverage this.
So we're a little over time. So I do want to thank everybody for joining us. If you want to stay after in the room and have conversations, it's great. But I want to thank our panelists. Thank you and discussion. And thank you all. And I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon. Take care.